Hi there. Thanks for joining me for these quick tips for online teaching. I'm your host, Jenna Camp, and today we're talking about rubric grading systems. There have been many calls by educators around the country to use the lessons we are learning throughout this pandemic to inform a new vision of some of our most time-worn traditions in education, not the least of which is the ubiquitous A through F grading system. Yet distance learning presents us with a window to be creative and try new systems to address old challenges. We can re-envision, rebuild, or reframe what and how scholar learning is assessed. Today, I'll lay down an argument for giving a rubric grading system a try. Not just rubrics for individual assignments, mind you, but a rubric assessment for an end-of-course holistic skills assessment for your scholars. Let's take a look. Of course, there are many considerations of any grading system, especially as we are thinking about re-envisioning or reframing grading. We want to be sure to elevate equity and fairness for all scholars. We know that racial, ethnic, linguistic, socioeconomic factors are not equal across a city, a state, much less our country. Access to resources for marginalized populations, including food, housing, healthcare, hardware, stable Wi-Fi, and internet, make any grading system pernicious sometimes for certain scholars. And so if we're going to reframe this, we want to eradicate or at least mitigate these known inequities and barriers. We also want any grading system to promote flexibility and capacity for scholars and their families' needs, as well as teachers and schools' needs. Scholars and their families need an understanding of what assessments mean, a sense of empowerment that they know where to go, how to change, how to grow, what to do, and of course, a growth mindset in looking at what their scholar or what they themselves know and are able to do. Teachers and schools need clarity within the system. They need efficacy. It has to be an effective system for all. It needs to be viable so that when you're transferring schools, if a scholar is transferring schools or going from K-8 to 9-12 or 9-12 to higher education, that needs to be a viable system across all of these different institutions. And there has to be clear communication with all stakeholders in mind. And of course, any grading system has to appropriately assess learned skills and knowledge. We know that there is a continuum along the mastery of content standards, and we want to be able to appropriately assess where a scholar is at any given snapshot on that continuum. So assessment rubrics can do this. They address specific skills and knowledge that can be assessed across assignments. So you can still be using assessment or grading rubrics or a point scale for individual assignments. If you have a research paper, if you want to assess the scholar's ability to work with polynomials or quadratic formulas, or if you want to make sure that the scholar understands cell division before going on. You can still use individual assignment rubrics or systems. But here we're talking about showing a scholar's growth through a given time period, like a quarter or a semester or a trimester, and looking at the skills across all of these assignments. The language on an assessment rubric is oriented towards a growth mindset so that it encourages authentic feedback and teacher-scholar conversation. It isn't just the final stamp of approval, but rather it is one of those moments of feedback and discussion between the scholar and the teacher. This is an example of a 4-point rubric, an essential content standards assessment rubric for English language arts. This addresses all aspects of that domain. So for ELA, we have reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language. You can, of course, adapt this for the next generation science standards, for the NGSS, or for the math standards, or for the history, social science standards. This can be adapted to the domains within any specific content. And it's a 4-point rubric. Now, I am always playing with the language on the rubric. Recently, I've settled on 4 is strong, 3 is competent, 2 is developing, and 1 is nascent. Now, if your school or district are still expecting traditional A through F scores on any report card, then you can still adapt these numbers into letters. Or if you're using a percentage system, this can be, excuse me, the ones can be the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s%, right? So this is holistic. It gives a complete snapshot across all the skills that you want your scholars to be learning throughout this time period, your quarter or semester, and it's flexible. A scholar might present as a strong reader, a competent writer, a strong speaker and listener, and competent with language. And then you can sort of decide where that overall falls and have that conversation with the scholar, have the scholar, him or herself, be a part of this assessment conversation. I hope this has been helpful. For more quick tips for online teaching, check out www.jennacamp.com or find me on Facebook or Instagram at Jennacamp Educational. Thanks so much.